Definitions of identification and entity authentication. In this video, we are going to see about definitions of identification and entity authentication. Definition of identification. Identification is a technique designed to allow one party, that is the verifier, to gain assurances that the identity of another, that is the claimant, is as declared, thereby preventing impersonation. An identification code signal is impressed on a carrier to be identified, such as an electronic data signal or a physical medium, in a manner that permits the identification signal later to be statistically discerned and the carrier thereby identified. The methods are characterized by robustness despite degradation of the encoded carrier and by holographic permeation of the identification signal throughout the carrier. Definition of entity authentication. Authentication is the act of confirming the truth of an attribute of a single piece of data, datum, or entity. In contrast with identification, which refers to the act of stating or otherwise indicating a claim purportedly attesting to a person or thing's identity, authentication is the process of actually confirming that identity. Authentication might involve confirming the identity of a person by validating their identity documents, verifying the validity of a website with a digital certificate, tracing the age of an artifact by carbon dating. It also involves verifying the validity of at least one form of identification. Definition of electronic authentication, that is e-authentication. Electronic authentication, e-authentication, is a process of establishing confidence in user identities. It's presented electronically to an information system. This may involve verifying with what the user knows, for example, password, what the user has, for example, an ID card, and or what the user is or does, example, fingerprint or written signature recognition. The greater the number of factors being verified, the higher the confidence can be established. Types of authentication. In this video, we are going to see about types of authentication. Authentication methods are used to verify the integrity of data in communication channels. There are two different cases found in authentication: user authentication and message authentication. User authentication is usually implemented using a user's specific characteristics, for example, digital signature. In message authentication, a prearranged structure of the message is used to verify the genuineness. There are three different methods for authenticating a user. Authentication by knowledge, first type. Authentication by ownership, second type. Authentication by characteristic, third type. Authentication by knowledge. Now, let us see about the process of authentication by knowledge. Authentication by knowledge is one of the most convenient way of proving one's identity to a machine. Examples of some of the means that are included in first type authentication are private data about one's self or family, personal identification numbers, PINs, and passwords. The advantage of this type of authentication are: wherever the user goes, so does the authenticator. The authenticator can be easily changed if needed. Easier to guard than a second type authenticator. The authenticator can easily input to the authenticating mechanism via a keyboard or keypad. However, first type does have also its limitations. This method relies upon the authorized individual processing something which can be forgotten, copied, or possibly even guessed by some unauthorized person. First type authentication is used in day-to-day life by many entities, that is, computer network, automated bank teller machine, telephone calling cards, etc. The ease of duplication makes first type always an imperfect form of authentication. This type of authentication, or what you know, that is passwords, passphrases. Authentication by ownership. In this video, we are going to learn about authentication by ownership. Authentication by ownership of physical objects is identifying user by what he or she physically owns. Authentication by ownership's second type is not as susceptible to duplication as first type. Second type authentication relies upon the authorized person having a physical object such as a passcard, key, or a challenge response generator. Normally, these objects would require an amount of effort on the owner's part to keep them safe from theft or from being lost. These problems are the primary shortcomings of all second-type objects. Second-type objects are based on the principle that duplication of them would be more costly than the value of what is being guarded. This type of authentication are what you have: keys, badges, ID, passcards, tokens. Authentication by characteristic. Now we are going to see about authentication by characteristic. Authentication by characteristic, third type, verifies a user's bodily characteristic rather than questioning what the user knows, first type, or has second type. Examples of this authentication are fingerprint and retinal scanners, DNA pattern analysis, and other biometric measurements. Third type is much stronger than the first two, and it is most closely related to the original purpose of verifying the identification of a potential user. This procedure may be more precise than first or second type, but it is usually more expensive. Third type authentication mechanisms are rarely used because of their high cost, except in cases where very high authentication reliability is required. In this case, an array of the different authentication types would prove most effective. Password authentication. In this video, let us see about password authentication. The most common authentication factor is a password. A method of user password authentication is described which is secure even if an intruder can read the system's data and can tamper with or eavesdrop on the communication between the user and the system. The method assumes a secure one-way encryption function and can be implemented with a microcomputer in the user's terminal. In most enterprises, the use of passwords is the primary means of authenticating a user. Unfortunately, it is also the weakest form of authentication. In today's digital world, the ways to bypass this form of security are common. While many enterprises focus on strengthening passwords, these efforts are by and large meaningless in the face of the tools that attackers can use. The tools provide criminals with easy ability to hack, trap, or crack most passwords easily. Password vulnerabilities. Now we are going to see about what is password vulnerability. When balancing the cost of security and the value of protected information, the combination of user ID and secret password is usually adequate. However, passwords give a false sense of security. The attackers know this and attempt to crack password as a step toward breaking into computer system. A number of possible vulnerabilities arise from the use of passwords. They can be guessed, they can be forgotten, they can be shared, they can be written down and subsequently lost or stolen. Measurement of mitigating one of these vulnerabilities can increase exposure to another. For example, strong passwords can be difficult to remember, and this may lead to their being forgotten or written down and subsequently stolen. Here are the two general classifications of password vulnerabilities: organizational or end-user vulnerabilities and technical vulnerabilities. organizational or end-user vulnerabilities. This includes lack of password awareness on the part of end user and the lack of password policies that are enforced within the organization. However, most people prefer to create passwords that are easy to remember. Users like to use such passwords as password, their login name, or a pet's name. Unless users are educated and reminded about using strong passwords, their passwords are usually weak and easy to guess. Seldom changed. Reused for many security points. When bad guys crack a password, they try to access other systems with the same password and username. Written down in non-secure places, the more complex a password is, the more difficult it is to crack. However, when users create more complex passwords, they are more likely to write them down. Hackers can find these passwords and use them against user. Technical password vulnerabilities. User can often find these serious technical vulnerabilities after exploiting organizational password vulnerabilities. Weak password encryption schemes. Hackers can break weak password storage mechanisms by using cracking methods. Software that stores passwords in memory and easily accessed databases. End-user applications that display passwords on the screen while typing. Password attacks. In this video, we are going to see about password attacks. Password attacks are the classic way to gain access to a computer system to find out the password and login. The growth of the internet has created unlimited opportunities for these intruders to steal secrets, tinker with websites, abscond with credit card information, or just generally make mischief. Password hackers approach their craft from a number of motivations. Their goals might differ, but they all have the goal of gaining power and control of a computer system or network. Many of their intermediate steps are therefore the same. Methods for getting passwords. An intruder who gains interactive entry to a system can employ other techniques to build system privileges. Therefore, finding a password is often the first step in cracking a network. Some common password attack methods include Trojan horses, dictionary attack or guessing, intercepting, social engineering attack, brute force attacks. In this video, we are going to see about brute force attacks. Brute force attacks can crack any password in given sufficient time. Brute force attacks try every combination of numbers, letters, and special characters until the password is discovered. Many password cracking utilities let us specify such testing criteria as the characters and password length to try. A brute force test can take quite a while, depending on the number of accounts, their associated password complexities, and the speed of the computer that is running the cracking software. Smart hackers attempt login slowly or at random times, so the failed login attempts are not as predictable or obvious in the system log files. Some malicious users may call the IT help to attempt a reset of the account they have just logged out. This social engineering technique could be a major issue, especially if the organization has no or minimal mechanisms in place to verify that logged users. Exhaustive password cracking attempts usually are not necessary. Most passwords are fairly weak. Even minimum password requirements such as a password length can help you in your testing. You may be able to give your cracking programs more defined cracking parameters, which eliminates combinations for faster results. Dictionary attacks. Now let us see what is dictionary attacks. A method used to break security systems, specifically password-based security systems, in which the attacker systematically tests all possible passwords beginning with words that have a higher possibility of being used, such as names and places. The word dictionary refers to the attacker exhausting all of the words in a dictionary in an attempt to discover the password. Dictionary attacks are typically done with software instead of an individual manually trying each password. The most common method of authenticating a user in a computer system is through a password, and it is the most convenient and practical way of authenticating users. However, this is also the weakest form of authentication because users frequently use ordinary words as passwords. Hackers and spammers take advantage of this weakness by using a dictionary attack. Hackers and spammers attempt to log into a computer system by trying all possible passwords until the correct one is found. So, many users use a password that is the same as their username. Some users use a street name, a maiden name, or the name of a child for a password, and some use easily guessable character combinations such as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, A, B, C, D, E, or Z, 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 Z. Password policy and discipline. Now let us see the process of password policy and discipline. All system-level passwords, for example, root, enable, Windows Administrator, application administration accounts, etc., must be changed on at least a quarterly basis. All production system-level passwords must be part of one of the administered global password management database. All user-level passwords, for example, email, web, desktop computer, etc., must be changed at least every 6 months. User accounts that have system-level privileges granted through group memberships or programs such as sudo must have a unique password from all other accounts held by that user. Where Simple Network Management Protocol (SNMP) is used, the community strings must be defined as something other than the standard defaults of public, private, and system, and must be different from the passwords used to log in interactively. A keyed hash must be used where available. Example, SNMP v2. All user-level and system-level passwords must conform to the guidelines described below. General Password Construction Guidelines. All users at company name should be aware of how to select strong passwords. Strong passwords have the following characteristics. Contains at least 3 of the 5 following character classes. Lowercase characters, uppercase characters, numbers, punctuation, special characters. Contain at least 15 alphanumeric characters. Weak passwords have the following characteristics. The password contains less than 15 characters. The password is a word found in a dictionary, English or foreign. The password is a common usage word such as names of family, pets, friends, co-workers, etc. Computer terms and names, commands, sites, companies, hardware, software. Birthdays and other personal information such as addresses and phone numbers. Word or number patterns like AAABBB, QWERTY, ZYXWVUTS 123321, etc. Any of the above spelled backwards. Any of the above preceded or followed by a digit, for example, secret one secret. Password protection standards. Always use different passwords for company name accounts from other non-company name access, for example, personal ISV account, option trading, benefits, etc. Always use different passwords for various company name access needs whenever possible. For example, select one password for systems that use directory services, that is LDAP, Active Directory, etc. for authentication, and another for locally authenticated access. Do not share company name passwords with anyone, including administrative assistants or secretaries. All passwords are to be treated as sensitive, confidential company name information. Passwords should never be written down or stored online without encryption. Do not reveal a password in email, chat, or other electronic communication. Do not speak about a password in front of others. Do not hint at the format of a password, for example, my family name. Do not reveal a password on questionnaires or security forms. If someone demands a password, refer them to this document and direct them to the Information Security Department. Always decline the use of the Remember Password feature of applications, example Eudora, Outlook, Netscape Messenger. If an account or password compromise is suspected, such incident must be supported as soon as possible. Application Development Standards. Application developers must ensure their programs contain the following security precautions. Shall support authentication of individual users, not groups. Shall not store passwords in clear text or in any easily reversible form. Shall provide for some sort of role management such that one user can take over the functions of another without having to know the other's password. Use of passwords and passphrases for remote access users. Access to the company name networks via remote access is to be controlled using either a one-time password authentication or a public-private key system with a strong passphrase. Passphrases. Passphrases are generally used for public-private key authentication. A public-private key system defines a mathematical relationship between the public key that is known by all and the private key that is known only to the user. Without the passphrase to unlock the private key, the user cannot gain access. Passphrases are not the same as passwords. A passphrase is a longer version of a password and is therefore more secure. A passphrase is typically composed of multiple words. Because of this, a passphrase is more secure against dictionary attacks. A good passphrase is relatively long and contains a combination of upper and lowercase letters and numeric and punctuation characters. Alternate authentication approaches. In this video, we are going to see about the process of alternate authentication approaches. In the age of online banking and identity theft, proving who you are and preventing other people from using your identity is increasingly important. Some authentication methods, such as prompting for a password, are easy to implement. Others, such as checking a person's fingerprints, are much more accurate. Choosing the right authentication method depends on how it is going to be used. The most common authentications are password and PIN-based authentication, SMS-based authentication, symmetric key authentication, public key authentication, biometric authentication. Password and PIN-based authentication. Using password or personal identification number PIN to log in is the most common knowledge-based authentication method. Real-life example: use of password to log in public library system for book reservation. SMS-based authentication. SMS is used as a delivery channel for a one-time password OTP generated by an information system. User receives a password through the message shown in the cell phone and enters the password to complete the authentication. Real-life example: use of SMS-based authentication in login of internet banking system. Symmetric key authentication. In symmetric key authentication, user shares a unique secret key with an authentication server. The user may be required to send a randomly generated message, that is a challenge, encrypted by the secret key to the authentication server. If the server can match the received encrypted message, that is the response, using its shared secret key, the user is authenticated. A slight variation of this approach is the use of OTP tokens, which generate the OTP on user side for matching with that generated on server side. Real-life example: use of OTP to log in internet banking system. Public key authentication. Public key cryptography provides an authentication method that uses a private and public key pair. A private key is kept secretly by the user, while the corresponding public key is commonly embedded in a certificate digitally signed by a certification authority. The certificate is made available to others. Real-life example: updating address of registered voters with registration and electoral office. Biometric authentication. Biometric is a method by which a person's authentication information is generated by digitizing measurements, that is encoded value of a physiological or behavioral characteristic. Biometric authentication verifies users' claimed identity by comparing an encoded value with the stored value of the concerned biometric characteristic. Real-life example: use of fingerprint in passenger immigration. Biometric authentication. In this video, we are going to learn about biometric authentication. Biometric technologies are automated methods of verifying or recognizing the identity of a living person based on physiological or behavioral characteristics. Biometric authentication has been widely regarded as the most foolproof, or at least the hardest to forge or spoof. Generally, a biometric system has two stages of operation: enrollment and recognition. Enrollment refers to the stage in which the system stores some biometric reference information about the person in a database. This reference information may be in the form of a template, features extracted from the biometric sample, or the biometric sample itself, for example, face or fingerprint image. In many applications, some identity attributes about the person, that is name, ID, number, etc., is also stored along with the biometric reference. When no personal identity information is available, for example, unknown latent prints lifted from a crime scene, anonymous authentication applications, etc., the reference is usually tagged with a system-generated ID for future recognition. Recognition. In the recognition stage, the system scans the user's biometric trait, extracts features, and matches them against the reference biometric information stored in the database. A high similarity score between the query and the reference data results in the user being authenticated or identified. Types of biometrics. A number of biometric methods have been introduced over the years, but few have gained wide acceptance. Signature dynamics. Based on an individual's signature, but considered unforgettable because What is recorded is not the final image but how it is produced, that is, differences in pressure and writing speed at various points in the signature. Typing patterns. Similar to signature dynamics but extended to the keyboard, recognizing not just a password that is typed in but the intervals between characters and the overall speeds and pattern. This is akin to the way World War II intelligence analysts could recognize a specific covert agent's radio transmissions by his hand, the way he used the telegraph key. Eye scans. Eye scans, favorite of spy movies and novels, presents its own problems. The hardware is expensive and specialized. By using this, it is slow and inconvenient and may make users uneasy. In fact, two parts of the eye can be scanned using different technologies, the retina and the iris. Fingerprint recognition. Everyone knows fingerprints are unique. They are also readily accessible and require little physical space either for the reading hardware or the stored data. Hand or palm geometry. Many used to fingerprints but think of an entire hand as an individual identifier. This method relies on devices that measure the length and angles of individual fingers. Although more user-friendly than retinal scans, it is still cumbersome. Voice recognition. This is different from speech recognition. The idea is to verify the individual speaker against stored voice pattern, not to understand what is being said. Facial recognition uses distinctive facial features, including upper outlines of eye sockets, areas around cheekbones, the sides of the mouth, and the location of the nose and eyes. Most technologies avoid areas of the face near the hairline so that hairstyle changes won't affect recognition.